welcome to the show. I'm Tosh Taylor.
And I'm Jenna Morton, and this episode is going to be a fantastic discussion that please don't get turned off by the dry nature maybe of what it sounds like it's going to be, because I think you're going to love this discussion. Today with us in the studio we have one of the Deputy Governors of the Bank of Canada, Sharon Kozicki. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I, for one, am thrilled to have this conversation because I have children in my house who are 12 and 13 and are asking me questions about inflation and finance, and I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I can tell you what I think the answer is, but I'm pretty sure I, like many people, think they know what inflation is, think they know what the Bank of Canada does, but do we really?
Yeah.
So I would think that you come across people that have a lot of misconceptions about what you do.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit maybe just about what the bank does, and then we can go into like inflation, because that's a little bit more of what I'm focusing a lot of time in my job on.
Perfect.
So the bank does a lot more than people realize. One of the things we're responsible for is we actually arrange for the printing of cash. So we're the ones that arrange for this.
Cool.
And we want to make sure that this is not easily copied or counterfeited. And that's why in recent years you've started noticing like the little window.
I love when you move it there, you can see the little holograph of the Queen's face and the...
Yeah, and so all sorts of things to make it really, really difficult to counterfeit. Other countries do this stuff too. Notice, so this is a 20 euro note. Not nearly as pretty as our Canadian 20.
No judgment, though.
And then this is the even more
colored.
boring US $20 note. No window.
No window.
But yeah, all sorts of things in here if you look closely to try to keep things from counterfeiting. So that's one of the things we do, is we actually even have people doing research to how to keep ahead of the counterfeiters. The windows, really, really, really effective.
Interesting.
Excellent.
So that's one thing the bank does. Another thing that we do is we supervise retail payments. Okay, so what does that mean, right? So you go to the store, you pay with your 20, store owner takes it, done, right? They got the money in hand, you've got your product, everything's done. Okay, well what happens if you pay with it, for it, credit card,
Right.
or something on your phone, right? The money doesn't immediately get into the hands of the retailers, right? It's sort of going through the stuff
all
in
the ones
middle.
and zeros
And
out
so
in the world.
basically we want to make sure that the money's going to get to where it has to be. So we supervise the various companies that do these retail payments to make sure they've got practices in place so that when you tap, that money will get to the store and get credit to the right place. So right amount going to the right place. So that's another thing that we do. And then we do other things as well, but one of the big things that I'm involved in is monetary policy. And monetary policy is about trying to keep inflation low, stable, predictable, around 2%. So what's inflation?
Yes. Let's see if it's what I've told my children it is.
All right, well, everybody understands prices, right? You go into a store, you see a price. Everyone understands when prices increase. You go into the store, what you paid $10 for yesterday is now like $12, right? Like, that's a price increase. Is that inflation? Well, we use the term inflation to not talk about the price of any one thing, but finding ways to look at overall in the whole, like everything you buy and spend money on. What's going on in that price of all of this complicated stuff, right? So Statistics Canada has ways of looking at the prices of all of these individual little goods, figuring out how to weight them so you can get this broader measure of prices overall, and then how much that changes is inflation. And when you hear me talk about numbers like 2%, that's like over a 1 year period. So how much has this broad-based thing gone up over the past year? But just to give you an idea of how complicated it is, just imagine, your kid decides to go to a movie, right? So there's the movie ticket, maybe there's popcorn, maybe there's candy, maybe there's a soft drink. And all of those things are prices, and they don't always move in the same direction or by the same amount. And that's why we need to look at this broader index, because the fact that one thing's going up doesn't necessarily mean everything is going up. And so that's what inflation is. It's sort of like this broad-based overall, how much more do you need to spend this year than you did last year to buy the exact same stuff? That's one way of thinking of it. But it's not even just for one person, right? We're trying to get it like the average person in the whole economy.
Yeah, straight across the country. That's huge.
That's huge, and that's huge. And that does mean people at times are like, wait, what? You're telling me it's 2%? But I don't know. It seems like I've been spending more this year than just 2% more. Other people might be like, whoa, it's been a good year.
Yeah.
And it just, again, it can depend a little bit. On average, over time, a lot of those things end up evening out, but at any one point in time, people might have very, very different experiences. Yeah.
Well, and then you factor in that other side of the equation of what are you earning and how much money do you
Exactly.
have to spend on this increase? And if those things aren't growing at the same rate,
Yeah.
it hurts.
It hurts. And that's one of the things we're hearing right now, right? Because when people, we target inflation, which is how much these prices change from one year to the next, right? We don't go back and try and fix past misses.
Okay.
So what did we go through? Kids may not remember this, but parents certainly do, right? The price levels are a lot higher now than they were 5 years ago. Not just 2%, 2%, 2%. A lot higher than that, right? And so the price level is higher. We don't go through and try and bring it back down again. Generally, trying to bring things back down again can be really costly for everything else that's going on. So when the economy isn't as strong, the way to think about that is you tend to hear more about layoffs. You tend to have more people unemployed looking for work, and that's pretty costly. So since it tends to be costly to try to reverse some of those past things, we're always looking to, okay, we can't change the past, let's get the current and the future under control.
Okay.
And so, so that's what we're doing. But it does mean people see higher prices.
Yeah.
And there is at times this confusion between, well, prices are high, how can you tell me inflation is low? And that is a challenge because we're trying to make sure that, okay, the prices may be higher than they were, we're trying to make sure they don't continue on that trajectory. And
Yeah.
they're more stable.
And how exactly do you do that, though? Because the bank, there's not an organization, the Bank of Canada or anything else that goes, oh no, this is what prices are, right? The retailers still get to set
They set
where
the
things
prices.
are.
Yeah.
So what role does the Bank of Canada play in helping the rest of Canada?
So there's only one thing that we can move, and that's this one interest rate. Now again, some people in the audience will say, well, isn't there one interest rate? There are tons of different interest rates, right? The amount that you pay to borrow money to buy a car might be different than the amount of money, interest rate you have to pay in order to buy a house. And then even if you're buying a house, some people take interest rates that vary over time. Other people want to lock in. So there's a lot of different interest rates. We control one. But that one then feeds through and affects others. But here's the idea. In general, when interest rates are higher, costs more to borrow money, maybe not as good a time to buy a big purchase like a car, or to not pay off your credit card if your interest rates move with that, right? When interest rates are lower, it's like, ooh, might be a good time to borrow money. And going back, when interest rates are higher, maybe it's a good time to put money into a savings account or into a GIC, something that's like a savings account locked in a little longer. Get a little more return on it, have more money to spend in the future, right? All of those things mean when we raise our interest rate, costs a little bit more on the bank side, they raise their interest rates, it all sifts through, people want to save more and spend less. When people want to spend less, then businesses are like, ooh, it's a little harder for us to raise prices now. We need to be attracting these people in, right? And so you tend to see, when people are spending less, you tend to see then that price pressures come down. So interest rate up, economy slows, which is our way of saying spending less, and then pressures on inflation, not as high, so inflation tends to be softer. And you can tell the story the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So for someone who has, maybe young children right now, a lot of people, I think, a lot of conversations I'm hearing with parents, they're worried about their children's future in terms of what are they going to be able to afford, especially when we're looking at things like houses and cars and those big ticket items that we see these jumps really happening. What can you say to people who are worried about that?
Yeah, I mean, right now, housing, shelter, because it's not always a house, sometimes it's an apartment that people are renting, those costs have gone up a lot. And frankly, in some of these environments, like in rents, you know, brand new rents on new places aren't really going up, but there's still a lot of catch up going on, right? And that's a challenge. But you know, when people are looking forward, a lot of people don't want to just rent. That's a stepping stone, and they want to buy. Housing is expensive, right? And so, you know, it's one of those things you have to start thinking ahead on to try to build up some savings for a down payment, right? Let's face it, we can't all move into our dream home right away. Starting small, you know, building up some equity, which means paying down some of that debt on the house, and maybe the house price goes up a little, and then maybe selling that house, buying something bigger. Those sorts of things can help people sort of over time get into what is ultimately their dream home. But it is really expensive for houses right now. We're in a position where the cost of a house compared to the amount of income, it's really high compared to history. Now, interest rates are a little lower. I'm old enough to remember my parents dealing with a mortgage in the 70s. It was not a happy time, right? Like right now, we're talking about mortgage rates that, you know, it depends on the type of mortgage you have. You can get some that are maybe around 4. You can get some that are, you know, above 4, above 5 even. It's going to depend what you want in the type of mortgage you get. Like in the 70s, we were talking like above 15, right? So why does that matter? Because when you're paying that monthly check on that house you buy, how much interest you're paying matters a lot. And so when you've got a lower interest rate, even if it's not as low as they were back in 2019, 2020, 2021, you're still paying less on interest, which means you can, for the same mortgage payment, have more in terms of the house price. It doesn't mean it's easy, right? I mean, the hope is, and you hear this a lot right now from politicians, finding ways to build more affordable housing, right? We have a shortage in Canada of those entry-level affordable housing units. Interest rates can't solve that, right? Parents advising their kids to save. How long do you have to save to get the down payment, right? What we need in the country is more affordable housing, good entry-level options, and then people can start over
That
time
process.
trying that process. Yeah.
I feel like it must be a bit of a cycle. One can only assume that our parents thought the same thing. How are my children ever going to get out of my house? They're going to be
Definitely
here.
think mine thought that.
Yeah.
There were 5 of us in there at one point. They were ready.
Yeah.
I think that the cycle continues, right? That it doesn't. Yes, I understand. Probably more so now that I'm an adult and also have my own children. That I think the same thing. Like, how am I going to be able to afford college for them? How am I going to be able to watch them get their first cars or what have you? And I think, like you're saying, it comes back to maybe as parents we need to start younger and like get them their own bank accounts, get them understanding, paying for their own items, making an allowance until they're old enough to get a job.
Yeah, yeah. And exactly, good practices starting young and learning how to manage money really, really can be helpful. And sometimes it's simple things, right? Like grandma gives the $100 and the child's told, okay, you're allowed to spend $90. $10 is going to go into savings, right? And getting into that practice of, whenever you have something, some of it you sort of put away. And it's not that that money never necessarily gets spent. Sometimes it's teaching that, if you really want to get that cell phone, putting aside a little bit of money along the way, and then you'll have enough that you can go in and purchase it. Probably still some help from mom and dad on the monthly fee on that one. Yes. But that sort of thing can help people understand that idea of saving for what they want to buy. Because the other thing that you see these days, like I went online and I was looking to buy something, And it told me if I didn't want to spend for that towel all at once, I could split the payment for that towel.
4 ways,
Yes.
right? Like 4 monthly
I'm like,
installments.
seriously? Like, that is a really, really not good thing to do because you forget and you're spending money you don't have yet, but that means that the next month, well, you've already sort of spent some of that, right? So then you have even less. And then next month, if you've done the same thing again, you still have the holdover from the first plus some of the second. It's really, really easy to fall behind in that structure. The other thing, right, like not something teenagers are going to have, though maybe I'm out of the loop on this one, credit cards, right? Teaching people how to use credit cards. Credit cards can be really, really good. They're so easy. Tap, right? And so they're easy that way, and they give you bonuses.
Oh, yeah,
Like,
the
you get
points.
points.
Rewards,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, or cash back, right? Like, so you can get some good advantages out of credit cards, but if you only ever pay the minimum, every amount you don't pay gets interest put on it, and then you have to pay even more. So that initial thing that you bought becomes more and more expensive. Like, you're paying more than you initially thought because every month you haven't paid it off. You have to pay the bank more in order to be able to keep that credit going. So, credit cards, not saying don't use them, but pay off that balance every month, right? Just avoid getting into that situation where you're having problems. Always pay it off. And so there, right, some good ideas right at the beginning to teach kids early on. Try and save a little. Maybe try and save up for some of those special purchases. And then, trying to find ways to make sure people understand when they're actually borrowing. Because it doesn't seem like when you click pay over 4 months that you're really borrowing. And it doesn't seem like it when you go into the store with the credit card and click that you're really borrowing. But borrowing means you're paying more than the initial price because you're having to pay the credit card company or whoever gave you that option. Option. Somebody's having to pay. You're having to pay.
It's going to be you, yes.
Yeah, you're having to pay for that.
And
Yeah.
I think one of the greatest things that we can do as parents is have these kind of conversations openly. I know, my husband and I talk about it all the time. There was so much taboo around talking about money
Absolutely.
for so long.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you have to, let your kids know how much is in every bank account and where you owe money. But you can still have these conversations and talk about how a credit card works versus a debit card versus, yes, you have this cash that grandma sent in the mail.
Yeah. And, I've gone shopping with my nieces where I've gone into the store and said, okay, in here, here's how much money that you have to spend. This is my gift to you as I'm taking you shopping, but here's how much money. You can't buy more than that. And then just to make it easy, I'll say, I'll pay the sales tax, right? So they don't have to try and do that mental math. Right? I'll pay the sales tax.
That is very kind of you, by the way.
But that's sort of that's making
That's
them
advanced
then
level.
say, do I want this or do I want this? Because there's not enough money to get both of those. And I think in general, that sort of idea of making people understand choices as opposed to just getting everything. That's another good habit to think about over time is, what do you really, really need? And then if you've got some left over, what do you want? But always trying to keep some of those wants in check because the needs are the things that are going to matter most over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those are the things that aren't going to feed your kids breakfast in the morning or supper at night.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Fortnite skins don't feed you.
I don't even know what that is.
2 12-year-old boys. That's where they want to spend all of their money, pretty much. But, but again, it's that same thing. Like, well, you have this birthday money. Okay, do you really want to save for a phone, or this instant gratification of some digital thing that you don't really own? And how do you balance that? Oh, well, you can get a $12 one of this. The skin package, and like, okay, well, $12. If you have enough, then maybe that's the little bit that you get to have as your treat to yourself. And
or it's like, and there's I always use the movie example. I'm not sure if it's really the greatest example these days, but there's a movie that's coming out that you want to be there in person because the special effects are just out of the world. All right, but there's also another form of entertainment, sitting at home, but you have to pay for the access. Well, this week, which one do you want? Maybe you can't do both, right? And I'm not trying to be a tough parent, because it's not about being tough parent, because maybe if that person actually had already saved up, then there's no issue, right? But it's just getting at that idea of there are limitations that everybody faces in what they can do. And learning early about, well, choosing between things, I think really can help. It becomes almost more automatic. Yeah.
I like that way of thinking about it, that you're building it up as a habit of the way you think about it by having those choices. Because I think as we get more and more into this digital age where people see so many things in front of them all the time, it is harder to understand that everyone is making those choices because you don't see the process behind it all.
Yeah. And you know, on that, like even going back to the credit card, right? I was saying pay it off every month, it's tap, it's easy, you can get benefits, but it's also sort of easy to forget how much you've tapped within a month, right? So trying to find a way to keep track of that tap along the way can be a really good practice at the beginning. And then after a while, it just sort of becomes second nature. Oh, I went out for dinner last night, and I bought this today, and maybe I can do without, you know, that coffee and lunch later in the week or something, right? Like it just becomes more automatic, but you sort of have to build up that habit. So things that can help build up those smart habits early, really help.
And you know what, we're talking about building these habits early for kids, but then these are habits that many of us adults missed as well, right? And that's why we're going into, you know, the second half of our lives not understanding what inflation truly means. We're having this big issue right now with tariffs and not actually understanding what they mean as well. We just assume up is bad. And it's your fault. Yeah.
I take no blame on tariffs.
Just go fix all that.
And I will say, you know, we've brought inflation down. We've lowered interest rates, the one that we can control. We're doing our best right now. And tariffs are not us.
No,
tariffs are not us.
No.
But they're things
that
we have to
impact
think
us
about.
all.
Yeah, and then we need to truly understand, so that, you know, these keyboard warriors aren't jumping on and saying, you know, that it's the Bank of Canada's fault that I can't have a house. It's you know, when truly it's just you haven't been able to take the time to learn what these things mean and how it can better your life to know these things in the long run.
So I'm going to give you another example, because this is sort of useful for people who are on the verge of going to university or college, right? So I worked in the United States for a while. And the thing to know about the United States is all universities are more expensive down there than up here, right? So it's a bigger bar to get in, and it's much more common for people to borrow money to be able to fund their education. And two different cases, right? One person that I know had to take out some loans in order to make the way through university, and within 1 year of graduating, had paid off the loans, right? Two reasons. One, was actually very, very cautious in what needed to be borrowed along the way, and then, you know, trying to really get that debt behind him once he'd finished, and saving and scrimping a little to pay it down. The other example was somebody who's going even a more expensive program, but with a higher payoff, higher expected salary at the end. Everybody had borrowed to get into this. But what I observed was people borrowing money, and then, like, I would go into the apartments that they were renting, and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this furniture. Renting wonderful furniture, right? As opposed to, like, finding the secondhand stuff to furnish the apartment. And no holds bar on entertainment all the way through. And then at the end, like, massive debt. Because rather than trying to figure out how to do it on the lowest budget, you know, living much more comfortably through the whole experience. And yeah, good salary at the end, but the good salary was not going to be enough to pay off that loan in 1 year or 2 years. Like, it was massive difference. Now, the program was more expensive, so it's not like these are exactly comparable. It was the behavior that was really different.
Exactly.
Right? And that's, again, the sort of thing that, it's not that borrowing money, when you're, especially if you're investing in yourself, it's not necessarily that that's a bad thing to do. But again, there's a payback. And so finding ways to do things in a balanced approach, and not going whole hog because somebody's willing to lend you the money. No. They're willing to lend it to you for a reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up our conversation there, but thank you so much for coming in and having this chat with us. We really appreciate it. And if people who are watching or listening want to learn more about what the Bank of Canada does and the various things, how can they find out more information?
So we have a website that has all sorts of information. Some of it's going to be a little boring and dry, but we also have like little videos that are out there that are actually, you know, designed to try and explain some of these more complicated concepts in easier ways. So there's a lot of really valuable information. So the website's a really tricky name. It's like www.bankofcanada, all pushed together, .ca.
Beautiful. Sharon, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you all for watching and listening, and we'll be back next week with a new show.